Dope. Well, I'm back. I'm back in the States. So Bryce and I are back, which is good. And I haven't seen this shirt that he busted out in a while. I think what we're celebrating the signing of, was it the number one running back in the nation? Did you see that?
Wait, who?
Committed to Ohio State. I don't know. I saw it in passing while I was in Italy. I assume that you
Was it?
probably were
Was it?
to it.
I saw like Bo Jackson's son or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
yeah,
that
something
committed
like
to
that.
us. I don't know.
But I
I
mean,
lose track these days.
that's fair. Well, I just saw you repping. I didn't know if anything good in the Ohio State world happened while I was away.
No, it's hard to keep track. Everything seems awesome in the off season, before season, spring game, and then we get into the season and we always like just drop the fucking ball at some point. So I'm keeping my expectations low, even though we're hypothetically going to be the best team in the country for like the second decade in a row, whatever. But no, I want to see some results, man. We can't be fucking putting up stinkers against Missouri.
Which is hilarious because we're like, our results are like other teams' wish list. We're like, national championship or bust, boys.
We're spoiled. Like literally, if we don't go undefeated and win a national championship every year at Ohio State, like people are rioting. So
Burning couches and shit, flipping cars.
Yeah.
No.
Frustrated.
Well, I'm back, and we're gonna do another buy or sell episode, but we're gonna do this in an interesting way. I think that we're going to touch on an important topic that we always encourage our clients, customers, people in our atmosphere to be or to be aware of, and then also just for all the listeners out there. I mean, we're in a space that is heavily populated with a lot of information. And if you listen to Bryce or I cover any topic for the most part, unless we have either we have really, really strong anecdotal data, or we have a really strong emotional feeling about something, typically we hedge our bets. And that can be seen as you're kind of being kind of cowards. You're not really like willing to push one way or the other. And I'm like, it's actually more that fitness, health, like so many other things, are contextual. Right. Yeah. You have to be able to take the data, the unique data per person, per subject group, and apply that. And there are a lot of things out there that can be very applicable for one group and completely useless for another. And that should be, talked about, should be explained. We shouldn't be misleading people just for likes or for, clickbait shit. So that is what we are going to do.
My bad. Not to cut you off. What I was going to add just to what you were saying there is that because we are in a space that deals with people's health, I think that it is incredibly prudent to make sure that everything that we're doing has a layer of context added pretty much at all times. And that in itself kind of necessitates moving away from saying that something is good or something is bad. And the more that we see people in the health, fitness, you can even include like bodybuilding, strength sports and all that, as much as you see people do the binary thinking and put out content that is saying, hey, this is yes, no, this is black, white, this is good, bad, I think that it really does a disservice, again, especially considering we are talking about people's health. And with that, it's not asking like, your political opinion, right? Where it might hurt your feelings, but it's not going to physically hurt you. We're dealing with things that if you give someone the wrong advice, it could cause them physical harm. So we want to make sure that we're always incredibly understanding of that, and we're not going to be violating people's trust in us as authority figures. I think this kind of plays into what we're about to talk about as well, but figuring out how you can trust the appropriate and correct people whenever you're looking at social media, you're looking at your general friend group, you're going to the gym and seeing like the people that work at the gym, seeing a personal trainer there, like how do you know if that person knows their shit or if they're full of shit, right? And I think that this is kind of leading into this this idea of being an informed consumer.
100%. And I'll preface this, this devil's advocate I'm going to play. I'll preface this with the fact that as a salesperson by trade, my entire life, that's all I've ever done in a job is sell things. I believe that most of the onus falls on the consumer, short of government and education, meaning like in learning something in school. Like when you control that, obviously there's it's really hard to circumvent that, right? If you're being fed a certain thought or a certain opinion or whatever about a subject matter, a topic, a product in school from a very early age, it's hard for you to get older and probably find your way around that, especially if it's still being permeated through everything, right? But most things aren't that, right? Most people are learning things now from TikTok, other forms of social media, word of mouth from friends, whatever new article is popping up on whatever blog. And that being said, if you are taking a sole source and making your opinion or your purchases or life decisions based on that sole source, I'm like, that's kind of your fault. I'm like, we could go back and point at that person and say they were dishonest, but how much effort did you put into your own knowledge, your own understanding? Like, everyone knows the feeling of walking into a mechanic's garage and how ill-equipped almost all of us feel, because we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. He could be like, hey, dude, your car needs to be rebuilt. And we'd be like, I couldn't even tell you otherwise, bro, because we don't know. And obviously, automotive engineering is super complex. Thousands of fucking parts go into this thing. So the idea that someone could sit and try to learn all of that to be better equipped for a conversation with a mechanic, go, I think you are reaching here. Not that great. But that's not what people are doing every day. People buying computers or hiring coaches or buying a pair of running shoes, like walking in and taking what one person says as law is not a good practice. And it's also really easy to circumvent. You could just go ask multiple people. You could do your own research. In a matter of 30 minutes, you can learn a decent amount about something and make a better informed and better equipped decision on something. That also being said, to your point about us being health professionals, I can understand that because people are so lazy, being in the middle, offering context when a person just wants an answer could, in some instances, stall a person's ability to get better. Kind of like a, hey, make your mistakes at 100 miles an hour type deal, and then go back and admit you were wrong and make, better decisions after that, as long as that latter part is there. Because if you go to a client who is overweight and maybe has some comorbidities that are floating around and they're not having the best of a health experience, and you're like, well, you could, and then it's also possible that that person probably leaves the doctor's office more confused about which direction to go than if the doctor had just said, you should definitely do this, don't do that, that's bad, without context. And yes, that lacks integrity. Go ahead, sorry.
I will say this, that I do think that a doctor, or something like a doctor, someone that has a lot more data at their fingertips, and they're able to control a lot more things with their clients, with their patients. And they also have insurance for the edge cases. Whenever they give advice, their client or their patient takes that advice, carries it through, and then they have a bad reaction, or they have an outcome that is on the periphery of what's to be expected, but it's still pretty negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where you, as a doctor, as a dentist, as a therapist, you have regulatory boards, you have exams that you have to pass to be certified, you have CEUs that you have to continue to stay up on to make sure that you stay certified. You have boards that oversee everything to make sure that there isn't fraud going on, that people aren't being taken advantage of, that the people who are practicing are actually competent and have a solid track record, right? And I think that that's slightly different than what we have to operate in, because what we're operating in is essentially unregulated, right?
Yeah.
That's also where I think you can get into certain professions that are more comfortable, more able to give black and white yes or no answers. Like if you go to your doctor and ask them, hey, should I go on Ozempic? Your doctor's gonna be like, yes or no, right? Or they'll be like, give me a moment, let's order some blood work, let's run you through some tests, and then on the other side of getting those results back, I'll have a yes or no answer for you, right? And then at the end of the day, it's still like you can decide as a patient whether you feel comfortable doing this, but the doctor can give you a more resounding yes or no. If someone were to come to us and say, should I go on Ozempic, which we had this conversation the other day, we can't give clients a yes or no answer. We have to say, hey, this is our opinion, this is how we view it, based on everything that we know and understand about this drug. This is what we think, but you should still do your own research, and you should still talk to your doctor, right? Like at that point, we're kind of just like an intermediary to give them advice. But again, kind of going back to what we were talking about with being in an essentially unregulated industry, I think that opens us up to a lot more potential for having negative repercussions for not being cautious with the things that we say and how we say them. You know, even what we do right now we do remote coaching, we work with a lot of women. You know, God forbid a female client were to accuse one of us of being sexually inappropriate. Like, there's no one that's going to oversee our ability to coach people and say, you're getting stripped of your license, you're no longer certified, you're no longer going to be board approved, you're not going to be able to practice anymore. No one's going to do that. But we'll essentially get blacklisted by word of mouth, right? Just reputationally, we would get blacklisted. But that's a bit more loud, right? Like, if that were to actually happen, like, people go on social media, people can talk about it, but there are subtle things that don't get talked about, right? Like, people in the fitness industry can run subtle scams for decades without ever getting caught. And like, we see that there's been a huge rise in social media accounts that expose specifically fitness frauds. And they have hundreds of thousands of followers now because it is it's morbidly entertaining to watch, because it's like every day there's a new person who's a gigantic fitness fraud who has been around for like years running this fraud on people. And it's like the depth of the fraud, the depravity of the fraud, like people say that they have cancer so they can get more clients and shit. Like, it's crazy stuff. But again, I think that is a product in a lot of ways of being in an industry that gives a lot of freedom to the people that are in it as practitioners, right? And there's a lot of self-policing that has to happen with coaches, with us doing what we do. We have to make sure that we keep other coaches on their toes, and, you know, we don't allow for that shit to happen. If someone gets caught doing that stuff, like, we very quickly blacklist them and don't really allow them back in the cool kids club anymore. But you know, talking about being an informed consumer, I do think that because there is no oversight, it's even more important in this industry. Anyone coming in looking to hire a coach, looking to get advice, looking for which content to follow for, you know, the closest approximation to the truth, which, again, like, truth in the fitness industry is like, it's shades, right? Like, we don't even fucking know what the truth is, right? Like, every day there's different truths that are being found out. Like, the body's crazy, but it does really come back to the consumer. It has to come back to the consumer, because that's where the buck stops, right? Like, we can continue to put out great content, say the correct things, get really great results with our clients, but if there's someone on the other side staring across from us that's loud as fuck, just continue to say, like, yes this, no that, good this, bad that, and people want to hear those things, they're saying exactly what people are looking for, they're going to continue to get people to pay them. And at least for the short term, until people figure it out, like, they're going to be able to take advantage of that, and they're going to potentially hurt a lot of people in that process. And it's like, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing that, like, some, like, oversight committee can do. Like, police can't do anything. There's no regulatory commission that can do anything. FBI can't do anything, at least as far as I know, maybe at a certain point. But again, it's like, if you're scrolling IG for fitness content, like, you need to figure out how the fuck you're going to be able to parse truth from someone who's like a charlatan.
Yeah. No, I mean, 100%. Yes. I think the devil's advocate that I was playing is the person who is louder, the person who has a bit more of an extreme tendency, has, if they're not just a complete moron, which is probably more likely they're just a moron, has adapted to the new consumer, who, because of what's available to us every single day at our fingertips in seconds, we expect answers. We don't expect context. We don't expect gray. We want yes or no. And so the point I was making was that, yes, I 100% believe, obviously doctors, it's different. But even with trainers, with people who are in the mental health space or whatever, when they say this is what is or isn't, there's definitely, what about this? What about that? But because most people especially in a time of need, emotional need, physical need. If they feel bad about their bodies, like they're in a moment of need, they want to be told what is next, and they would rather deal with the consequences later, implicitly so, because they're not being an informed consumer. But like you said, I think that I love Goob's account, right? He can go a little over the top, he can reach. However, I do think that and this goes back to my initial just core value, that I believe that certain levels of violence should be legal, because I believe people would act differently if someone could punch you in the mouth if you said some fucked up stuff. Like, I do think that it's kind of like the concealed carry deal, right? Like, you might be less likely to rob an old lady carrying a big purse, because she might just pull one on you and be like, nope, sorry, you're not getting it today, and put one in your leg, and now all of a sudden your whole life's different, right? People are, especially big names, and they should be more deliberate and diligent in making sure that they put out good mass helping, right? It should be something that is going to better the good of everyone who sees it, not
there
just
needs to be consequences,
yes,
right?
yes.
There have to be consequences for your actions. And I think that this is something that has been severely lacking in the fitness space forever. And I would say that it still is lacking, right? But that's where you have the prominence of certain accounts that, see, I actually don't condone it, right? Like, I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing. I think that there are aspects of bringing like people who are fraudulent in their activities to everyone else's attention. I think that's good. We want that. But at a certain point, it turns into a witch hunt. And then also what happens is the person who is running that account, they start to go on a power trip, like any good witch hunt, and they start seeking out what potentially is not there, right?
Yep.
So best way to think about this stuff is like, we don't want to be starting like inquisitions, right? We don't want to be looking for witches to burn at the stake and saying, oh yeah, if we tie a rock to you and you sink, you're not a witch. If you float, you are a witch, which means we burn you, right? We don't want to start shit like that, because we don't know where it ends, right? If cancel culture is toxic as fuck, we know this. If we allow certain things to run rampant, it's only a matter of time before it comes back to you. And I do think that that's where we have to figure out what we want from this, right? I think there absolutely must be consequences to people's shitty actions. And especially for people who've been running scams, been intentionally scamming their clients, fraudulent about, their certifications or their credentials, their background, whatever, right? Like, absolutely there needs to be consequences, but we just need to be careful, right?
Yeah.
Because it also is we have to remember, this is also a gigantic stain on the industry, right? Every time, it's Goob, right? Every time Goob makes a video, and I do think that the majority of it is good, right? I think the majority of it is good, it's useful, and it's warranted. I just get concerned, right? Because the majority of the time doesn't always correlate to like a good look for the industry. And whenever those videos get posted, from the outside looking in, you would expect that every single person in this industry is a fraud, right? Because it's like, how else are you going to have content to post every day with a new influencer, new coach who has been running some scheme for the last 5 years, right? Eventually, like, we have to start running out of frauds, but it doesn't seem like that. So I do get a little bit nervous about that stuff. I would like to think that the prevalence of accounts that are calling out these types of people are going to dissuade people currently and also in the future from partaking in those types of, like, shitty activities, and force more people to think before they act, because again, there are consequences now. Hopefully there are consequences, but we just want to make sure that we're doing this in the right way. And we also want to make sure that this isn't just like a band-aid to a larger problem, which I do think that the solution is more informed consumers, right? We have to teach people how they can better assess the coach that they're speaking to, the content creator that they're consuming, and then we don't have this problem anymore, right? Or it becomes much, much, much less of a problem, rather than us having to rely on the altruism and the good intentions, and potentially like the people or coaches being able to resist greed, because there's a lot of money floating around in this industry. It's so easy to like just get dollar signs in your eyes and convince yourself like, I'll never get caught, right? No one will ever catch me. And if they do, it'll be years in the future, which basically is what happens, right? It's like after a decade of people just siphoning $500,000 from their clients every year, it's like finally they get caught, but like no one's going to do anything at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like they're living in Costa Rica, they're chilling, they're not doing shit. So I think again, that's where agreed, we need to be very, very active in pushing for people to be more rational with how they're viewing things and how they're consuming things and the conversations that they're having. But I mean, it's definitely not going to be an overnight thing.
100%. And I have your same concerns about accounts like Goobs, where they make their dough on exposing people, right? And I think it goes back to, again, and maybe this is just a generational thing or what, but like I am an informed consumer in the way that sometimes he'll post things and I'm like, that's kind of a reach. Or you could have left that one alone, right? And most of the time it's like he has some big ones that come and it's like people are running scams. These accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers are like just kind of fucking people over and trying to duck it, which I'm actually not opposed to, because if there's context there, I've seen accounts like his open it for discourse. Now, this person said this is not the case. I'm telling you this is why this is the case.
I think that's good. That's what we need. That's what we should be doing, right?
The other that I'll see him go pretty heavy on are accounts like that, or people who use, like, they over filter their shit, or they say, look at these glutes that I've built, and you can like clearly see the wall bending behind them and stuff like that, which I gained a lot more respect for him when I think it was Zertel actually interviewed him at the Arnold this past year, and he was like, hey, I'm some fit chick and I'm trying to, boost up my followers. How do I beat you? How do I not end up on your account? And Goop straight up answered, he's like, give your edits more than a once over. He's like, most of these people they're lazy. Like, that's what I'm punishing them for, is they are lazily trying to con and fool people. And so I'm like, if you had just gone through this for a second or third pass, I would have never seen anything. But like, it was so blatant. And if anything, I'm punishing you for just the sheer arrogance that you're just like, you know what? I can do whatever I want. And I'm here to tell you, like, no, you can't. Like, don't be a dumbass, essentially. But if you want to edit your shit, just do it well. And I was like, you know what? I can really feel that. I'm like, you know what? Like, because people are going to try to find edges. People are going to try to find ways to get over. We all use filters. We all swipe over and go, oh, this lighting looks better. This lighting looks better. Right. And so there's just a level of like, hey, if I'm going to go and use an ab filter to make my abs just a bit more defined, this and that, and it's like blatant, someone should be like, hey, bro, don't do that. Don't do that, or I'm going to tell people you're doing that, right? But like you said, though, it should be constructive. There should be some sort of like, I'm trying to push us towards a industry full of integrity, or full of people who will call out things that lack integrity. And, kind of bridging that, there's actually one of our points was before and after photos, right? Of your clients, of yourself. And I've seen people use the context of a before and after photo for themselves or for clients. And I'm like, I know you personally, and I know that this before photo is actually like 7 years ago, and this wasn't what you've done in 6 months. This wasn't what you've done in the last year. Like, you took something to make your outcome, your results look drastically more impactful than they actually were. And could you go, well, this was still me? I'm like, yeah, it was, but also like you're trying to sell it as like, this is what I did on my last, program, bro. Like, but you didn't, right? And
especially whenever you purposely leave off the time frame. So it's like you post a picture from 4 years ago in your deepest off season, and then you post a current picture whenever you're 2 weeks out from a show, and you're like, transformation. It's like the assumption is that the before picture is from that prep, like before that prep or that off season, right? So if you aren't posting and you're not being straightforward about specific timelines, it's purposely misleading. And again, though, it's like the interesting thing for me is, do we consider that problematic? And if we do, what is the degree of problem that we have with something like that? And I'm just going to actually build off of that too, because I think that this is something I had in my mind as we were talking. Enhanced versus not enhanced. So do you remember, I think it was maybe last year or the year before, I can't remember now, time flies. whenever the Liver King got exposed for obviously being on steroids, remember he had vehemently claimed for a long time that he was natural, right? Yeah. And he rightly lost a lot of followers, got a lot of blowback because his entire brand had been built on like everything natural, right? Like going back to like your caveman roots, paleo this, red meat that, like all fucking stupid. Clearly we know that. But it did speak to a target demo that was very ingratiated in that mindset, right? Like everything natural. I'm gonna like, carve up everything with this steak knife and like no vegetables, like just shit like that, right? Like that was the target demo he's speaking to. So if he would have been claiming that he was natty while being enhanced and speaking to, I don't know, like soccer moms, they probably wouldn't have given a shit because that wasn't what they cared about. Right. Like they're not eating red meat. They're not the ones that are, waking up at 3 a.m. to do cold showers and shit like that. Like that's not them. But I do think that this is kind of an interesting parallel with like, okay, well, at what level of being disingenuous does it start to become problematic? Because with claiming natty while being enhanced, it's not affecting the knowledge that you have. It's not affecting the content that you're putting out. It's not affecting your ability to coach people and get them results. It's like, yeah, you're being dishonest, but like, is that affecting anything outside of it just having like a potential effect for coloring everything else in a slightly different light that you're putting out, right? Or just your integrity in general. I think the same thing with like before and after pictures. It's like, it's not affecting anything. I mean, you still hopefully in the after picture look awesome. And hopefully it is you in the before picture. So, there's not a complete lie going on. It's like, this is still technically before and after. Or, people that post pictures act like it's right now, but it's a picture from like, 6 months ago whenever they were leaner. And now, they've obviously put on a little bit of weight. People do that shit all the time. It's like subtle dishonesty, subtly misleading. It's like where do we draw the line of like, this is an issue, this is problematic versus this is something that we can just be like, all right, it's not that fucking big of a deal. It's kind of stupid that you're doing this, but it's really not that big of a problem.
Yeah. So I would mostly agree because I'm like, there are people out there who probably have less than, sound integrity throughout their business or the model in which they operate, but also can still provide a lot of help, right? It can still be a major resource for a group of people. Very Kant, like ends justifying the means. Like, is it okay to sit there and say, hey, they're getting a lot of really good results, they're helping a lot of people, and maybe not the way we'd want them to. Maybe it lacks a little bit more, moral high ground or integrity than we'd want. And also there's a lot of positive consequences here. I think the pushback that I have for this specific scenario, because I'm generally like very Kantian, like I'm like, yes, ends justify the means as long as they get us to a better place. Like as long as we move to a better place, like we have to do whatever serves the masses of humanity of the world best. I would say there's downstream negative effects for people who are lacking integrity in something like a before and after, or I'm natty, but they are enhanced. Because if you are proclaiming that, it's inherent that people are going to buy things from you or follow your teachings because of a couple of things. In my mind, I always say they want to be like you, be your friend, or fuck you. Like those are the three things that make people really want to digest whatever it is you're putting in there. If you're showing them an unrealistic expectation, if they're like, oh yeah, like I can be natty and I can be like you. Well, eventually you lose clients because people are not going to get the results that they're expecting because you told them this is what they can do. So short-term gain, awesome. And those people probably see some progress, also awesome. But they did not get what they bought, what they thought they were buying, because you told them it was otherwise. If you are an enhanced athlete, or if you're just enhanced in general, if you're taking tests or whatever because your doctor gives it to you and you just post yourself online, you don't have to tell people what you're doing. That's your prerogative, dude. Do whatever you want to do. If you are saying, this is what I do and this is how I look like this, and you leave that out and that's your job and you sell this to people, I think, sure, is it a big deal? No, because you probably can still be effective in helping people. But I think you shoot yourself in the foot because you've set a bar that they cannot achieve unless they mix in this thing that you conveniently left out. And also, let's talk about your reason for leaving it out. You leave those things out because you think that they will take away from your credibility, instead of taking the probably more complex and harder route, which is explaining that I still have a lot of credibility. And yes, I use these things, but here's what they do for me. Here's what they don't do for me. And you can choose to add this or not add this. And here's what we can expect in that capacity. All of a sudden, you've now informed your consumers a lot more and set a precedent for what they can and can't expect, thus instilling trust in more long-term clients.
Slightly related, but maybe a little bit further out there question that I have for you is, so if we're talking about before and after pictures, if we're talking about enhanced versus natty, those are questions of honesty that are directly related to whatever it is that they're selling, right? Like that is in that sphere. It's interesting to me whenever we start thinking about, okay, like what about whenever we venture outside of that sphere of what that person's expertise actually is, right? So dishonesty or immorality, that absolutely does not affect what that person does or what they're promoting, right? So a good example of this recently was Huberman. So Huberman had an article written about him. I think it was in New York Post or something like that, one of those magazines, papers, whatever. But it was bringing to light some issues that he had as a romantic partner, right? So definitely not super glowing. I would say that as a hit piece, it felt pretty short. Like it was, if you're going to be digging into someone's life, like you need to be finding something a little bit, more incriminating than what they found.
Right.
But essentially, like he was not super loyal. Like he wasn't very reliable as a romantic partner. He did some shady stuff with I think one of his girlfriends. Anyway, like just he doesn't seem like someone that you really want to date. Whatever. He gives fitness advice. He gives health advice, right? So yeah, there are certain aspects of the things that he talks about that start to get into like character building, I guess. I would venture to say that Huberman speaks more directly to like young men. That's probably his, 99% target demo. But just because someone is not a perfect partner or is maybe a little bit amoral or dishonest in their private life, it's like, okay, does that affect what Huberman is putting out or the legitimacy or, how much credence we should put into the content that he puts up? In my opinion, fuck no.
Right.
No, right? Like and also I think that the severity of the crime needs to be taken into account. If Huberman was like on the side, like as a serial killer, like, maybe we need to start thinking about cold punches a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's one of those where it's like amorality in that sense is not affecting the way that the content or his message is being perceived by his audience, right? I think part of it also has to do with the demo, because if it were majority younger women and he's like, having these issues outside of work with younger women, maybe that affects a little bit more. But another example there is Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. So we can think about any politician actually, but like that was one in particular where it's like our president fucking an intern. It does not affect his ability to be the president whatsoever, right? I'm pretty sure everyone would agree with that. But what it did do is it raised questions about the morality of the president. And it raised enough questions to the point where people started to lose trust in him overall in all of his other decision making, right? Because if you're impulsive enough to get a blowy under the White House desk in the Oval Office, right? Like, then maybe you're not the best person to be in charge of the nuclear launch button. So things like that, it's like, I can see it. I can see where you can make those logical connections. In my mind, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Do we want the person who's in charge of our country also being known for that? That's where we can have a discussion, right? Like, is that worth being impeached? Is that worth like having, more conversations about like what that means and like what we should do about it? Sure, whatever. But I do think that these are the questions where it's like, there are certain thresholds where we start to cross where it's like someone being amoral, dishonest in what they're doing, or just as a person in general, it either is or isn't affecting the message that they're putting out or their content. And I think that like the way we perceive that as consumers is affected pretty strongly by the distance that it is, like their immorality, their dishonesty is from what they're putting out, and also the severity of it as well.
Yeah. I think I told you at one point in time, as a black man, and I mean, whatever, whoever hears this, if you have a problem with it, you know where to find me. If I found a really good accountant and he moonlighted as a Klansman, but he took care of my money, I'd pay you to be an accountant, bro. I pay you to take care of my finances. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
do your
pay
fucking
you.
job.
Yeah, I don't pay you to like me or love me or promote and push my causes and desires. I pay you to do your job. And if
But
you
would you trust him to do his job if you knew that he hated people like you? Would you trust him to do your job?
So
Or do his job?
I'm a consumer that's like, hey, listen, I'm going to evaluate everything that you do.
Mhm.
Like, so like
Yeah.
to me, if I'm like, I heard you're great, I bring you on and you do great, and I keep comparing you to the masses. I keep shopping you, and I'm like, they still can't offer what he does for me. And even if he is like slipping something under the table and taking care of himself, if the other people out there that are competing for his job for my money cannot show and tell me they're doing a better job or can do a better job, then like you keep getting my money, bub. I think that's obviously a very extreme case, right? And there's a lot of emotional whatever there, but I truly do feel like, dude, like I don't care what you do. It's the Huberman thing. I always think about. For me, it's very close because I have a lot of friends who are now because they're old, past professional athletes that saw some backlash for certain things, and obviously much smaller than some of the grand scale things that we see. But like the Kobe Bryant thing, right? Him cheating on his wife was a huge thing, right? And everyone was like, well, this role model. I'm like, guys, you took a kid from high school and paid him millions of dollars to play a kid's game, and then you expected him to be a role model. He didn't apply for a role model job. He didn't apply to be the reason that your son gets up and does certain things. That's a you job, parents. That's a you job to mold and shape his or her, your kid's expectations of who they hold in these high regards. If you just allow them to, I'm going to do this because Kobe did it. I'm going to do this because LeBron does it. And then their careers come crashing down because of some sort of scandal. And then you go, you're a role model. I'm like, that sounds like poor parenting. Like I'm not going to let a professional athlete like raise my kid from a distance. Like that's you should be better about this.
Well, yeah, I agree with you on that, especially as it relates to their job title, right? They're an athlete. But how do you feel about Kobe or even someone like Tiger Woods losing sponsorship deals after having a personal life scandal?
I think that it's deserved, not in a way that it's morally deserved, so much as it is like,
you can understand it.
Yeah, I get it. Like, it's like, hey, like, listen, Nike sells to kids, Nike sells to women. If you violate either of these groups, like Nike has to detach from you. That's just kind of how it goes. And that's just a good business decision. Even if Nike can go, dude, you're not a bad person, but like business decision, we cannot be attached to you because this is what your name is carrying with it now. To that point of Huberman, it's like if he was giving dating advice or he was a life coach, like I could see people saying, hey man, I know we had you queued up to speak at this seminar, but like, sorry, like we're not going to bring you anymore. That would make sense. But I listened to him to understand kind of what we're talking about, like the marginal stuff in fitness and health. And he helps disseminate that in a way that people can understand. And his relationship promiscuity doesn't affect his ability to do that, right? If you were looking at Huberman, and this is what I think happens, is people become so attached to these personalities. They imagine themselves being friends with this person. I like this person. No, you don't know this person. You know their product. You like their product. But the minute you get attached to this person and you feel like somehow you can take ownership of this idea of who they are in your head, and that comes crumbling down, that's not a them problem. That's a you problem. And if you can't reconcile that, that's a maturity thing for me, right? Like you can choose to distance yourself and decide I'm not going to support this person because they violated my moral code. That's fine. But it doesn't make them less able to do their job. And if you start devaluing that product publicly, like, oh yeah, they're a bad this because they're a bad this, I'm like, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's a problem of deifying people and putting them on a pedestal. And we're also, I think, too quick to martyr people as well, kind of going back to the Kobe thing, where we were, well, not we, because we were too young, or I was too young for that.
Yeah.
Whenever all of it was happening, I mean, I remember
We're
it,
like
but like I
separated
was,
by a couple of years, bro.
but like we didn't know enough or care enough to like really understand what was going on, right? Like we understood that Kobe was in trouble for something. We didn't understand like the details of it. So I think now looking back on it though, like, I mean, not even just Kobe, but we can look to, we say any athlete that's accused of anything, or anybody who is in a position of power and prestige that is accused of anything, right?
Yeah. Ray
I
Lewis.
wasn't Ray Lewis is a good one too, right? Yeah. So like, Jay, like whether they did it, whether they didn't do it, right? Like, I think part of this is that there's a lot of power in reputation, but there's also a lot of power in pulling reputation down and destroying it. So as soon as there is an accusation, or as soon as there is a potential for like a reputation to be torpedoed, people are very quick to just pile on top of that and essentially like martyr that person, right? Be like, all right, well, you're taking the fall for this one. Good luck. But we're just going to pile on and just like, you're done, right? So there have been a few athletes over the years that I can think of, and just in general, a few people. So like, here's a good one, actually. Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of people don't know this, but Kevin Spacey was actually acquitted on every single charge and accusation that was levied against him. Did he do some wrong stuff? I literally don't know. I don't know. But all I do know is that he was found innocent, acquitted in the court of law of every single charge that was brought against him, which means that we should perceive this person as being innocent. We should move forward as if every accusation against him was false. But we haven't done that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Kevin Spacey lost everything. He lost an empire. He lost his reputation. He lost literally everything in his life. And Kevin Spacey was, I mean, by and large, known as one of the greatest actors of all time. So that's an interesting case to me, where, you know, the power of someone's reputation, but also the power on the other side of someone who can wield the destruction of your reputation, right? With a word, with just a sweep of the wand, essentially, with anything, right? They can destroy your reputation. That's a lot of power. And kind of bringing it back around to what we're talking about, you know, like, I think that anything that is enough to get people to question someone's morality, even if it's in a related sphere or unrelated sphere, doesn't matter to what they're doing. But like, if someone can, or excuse me, if someone's morality is starting to be questioned, then that all of a sudden brings up questions of their legitimacy in everything else that they've ever done or will continue to do, right? So I do think that's an important point. But it's weird. It's really weird though, because in reality, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense if you think about it for 2 seconds. Like, again, Kevin Spacey example, like, even if Kevin Spacey was like the scum of the earth, worst human being of all time, like, does that affect his ability to be a great actor, especially in the past? Like, no, objectively. Kobe, like, if Kobe was a complete piece of shit, does that affect his ability to put a ball in a hole? No, obviously not. But like, again, I do think that a lot of these things, kind of going back to what you're talking about, it brings up questions of like, do I want to be friends with this person? Do I want to be this person? Do I want to fuck this person? And all of those questions pull back around to a no if that person is amoral,
right,
or dishonest.
Yeah, and I think it's all about, again, like, what you seek in the interactions with that person, right? Especially because, like you said, they're like deifying these people, and so you're not having real life live interactions. You are getting a tailored and edited version of them, and you have to be aware of that, right? When you are deciding to take and what you're going to like. And I think, to the point earlier, even like with like Goob and accounts like his, I think what most industries are lacking, especially if you are old enough to have seen the swing from the Ben Roethlisberger in the bathroom days and the Ray Rice in the elevator days, to now a Deshaun Watson right? A situation like that where we were in a space where we were very much like innocent until proven guilty, and these guys would play full fucking seasons, right?
Yeah.
Before anything was found out. And of course, that's terrible, obviously, because these people did things that were terrible to people, to both the victim and the demographic the victim represents.
What was the outcome of the Brussels spurs stuff? I don't even remember.
It ended up falling into the same like Kobe category, where I was like, it's kind of iffy, like what was going on here, right?
Yes.
But obviously the Ray Rice thing, we
Yeah.
saw the tape, right?
Not
Like,
it. Yeah.
you know, and so that's like, okay, I get the extreme response to we need to get ahead of this, especially if you're the NFL, where you're like, hey, listen, I just can't even chance that this guy plays a full season, gets paid, and then we find out that he did all the shit. And also, it gave a lot of power in just even supposing a conviction, like supposing that someone had done something, right? The Me Too movement and the people coming out and stuff like that, it was great for the people that really supported. And also the negative fallout of that was that you had people losing things that you then found out later on didn't deserve to lose those things. That something was taken from them in a rash act of emotion or in some sort of like hostile vitriol or revenge. And that's problematic. And so what is lacking, just like there is a prosecution of an individual who trespasses on, you know, whether it's societal trust, you know, actual business integrity, whatever, there should be a prosecution for those who trespass on the trust in the accusation and the conviction process. If you are going to try to harness that power, and maybe you are harnessing it for good, this person deserves to be called out. They deserve to be notorious and to have things taken from them. But if you are going to take on that responsibility, if you're going to take that, you should also understand the ramifications if you mishandle it. If you decide to use it for some sort of alternative, you know, method there.
Yeah, I've always thought that people who admit that they made up or fabricated a story or an accusation, I've always thought that they should receive the penalty that the person they accused would have received had they have been guilty. I've always thought that. The only issue I have is what do we do with cases that go to a jury? And so we're obviously talking about like more severe stuff, right? Let's just say like, you know, sexual abuse or some kind of like sexual assault, because I think that that's where our heads probably immediately go whenever we're talking about these things. But with accusations that get taken to court, get taken to a jury, and then the defendant is not guilty after the jury decides, that doesn't mean that the accusation was necessarily false. It just means that there wasn't enough evidence to convict that person or prove them guilty.
Right.
So it's like, my worry would be that if we had some kind of, I guess, sweeping law that was reciprocal in the sense that, like, hey, if you're accusing someone of something and they're innocent or they're found not guilty, then you bear the burden of that consequence, that penalty now. I would imagine that any law would not be that black and white. It would obviously have a lot of context layered into it. Maybe it is something like, hey, if you admit after the fact that you were basically trying to ruin this person's life, then fuck you, which I agree with. Again,
or if it's proved you actually lied, if you did lie or fabricate, if whether
like
you admit it or not,
emails,
exactly.
Like, because that stuff comes out all the time, where it's like someone is collaborating with other people talking about, oh, I'm gonna like accuse this person of rape or whatever. It's like, all right, well, now we got you. We know what you're doing. And, you know, maybe you should now go to prison for the anti-rape, whatever, right? So I think that's where it does become, it's iffy though, right? Because we don't want to disincentivize people from coming forward and speaking out and talking about things that they have dealt with, especially if it is something that is very serious, like, you know, a sexual crime or any like assault in general or any kind of harm done to someone. We don't want to disincentivize that. We want to make sure that everyone has like a very free ability and they're comfortable to come forward and talk about those things. But also, I do think that the accusers need to understand the power that they hold in an accusation, right? And I think that that's what we're talking about here is it's not symmetrical. Like, there is a huge asymmetry in the power that the accuser has versus the accused in terms of reputational damage, right? And we know this. Like, we've seen it play out. And kind of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation is witch hunts, right?
Yeah.
these things they very quickly turn into witch hunts. And it's crazy how you see like the mob mentality take people over, and people are like pointing fingers at everyone else because they're scared to get fingers pointed at them. And there's just like this hysteria and madness that sweeps over everyone whenever they're scared of becoming the accused. And I think that's what we need to prevent. We need to be very, very, very careful of falling into those traps. And, even whenever we're talking about something that is much more innocent and much lower stakes, like, being in the health and fitness industry and people putting out fraudulent or, dishonest information, it's like, if we accuse someone of putting out information knowingly false or knowingly dishonestly, or if we accuse someone of photoshopping their pictures and it turns out that actually they weren't photoshopping their pictures, they just have a gigantic ass or something like that, right? Or maybe it was just a random warp in the picture. Maybe the mirror was a little bit warped, but like they didn't actually doctor it, whatever, right? But if you accuse someone, like you're automatically, you're going after their reputation.
Yeah.
And I think that is, in my opinion, that's serious. Like,
yes,
it needs to be treated seriously.
The defamation aspect of it is, I think it's actually pretty universal. I don't think that, because we understand it's not, what did Denzel say in Training Day? It's not what you know, it's what you can prove in court. So we understand that court has its loopholes and people beat them all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think that should, it is the actual blatant lack of integrity or dishonesty that is preempted, that should be punished. Defamation's a real thing, and it's one of those things where it's like, if Goob, like circling it all back, one, just want to make a quick note to just the main topic, which is whether you're looking at what's being prosecuted or how it's being defended, you as a consumer, don't be a part of the mob, because you end up, I get it, you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, but running one way or the other as quickly as possible doesn't make you informed. It doesn't make you smart. It doesn't make you more morally correct. It just means you're rushing to not be one of the people left and now having your finger pointed at you or a finger pointed at you.
And also understand that, like, you don't know what the wrong side of history is going to be in the future.
Yes.
That's very, very, very important to understand. Everybody has always thought that they were on the right side of history.
Yes.
No one has ever thought that they were going to go down as the losers or the people that were thought to be morally corrupt 100 years from that day, right? Sure, sometimes people understand that there might be some gray areas to these things, but a lot of times, like, I mean, I'm probably just going to be projecting here a little bit, but like, I'd imagine, kind of going back to what you were talking about, that even like slave owners in the past thought the ends justified the means.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not saying that they were good people or any less shitty or amoral or anything like that. But again, it's like, it's very hard to get in the minds of other people. So you have to automatically assume that if other people can be irrational and can be biased and can fall into these cognitive traps, you also can as well, right? So again, kind of going with the madness stuff, it's like, the madness of crowds is a wave, and it sweeps up everyone in its path, including you. Even for the most logical person ever, like, it's very hard to not get caught up in that shit. And even if you do think that you're on the right side of history and you want to jump the gun and make sure that no one ever had a question as to what side you were on, it's like, understand that you might be jumping the gun to be on the wrong side. And that's really important to note.
That's the thing is, and it's, to me, it just comes down, it's laziness, right? It's laziness, because what happens is, if you don't proclaim Israel, Palestine, BLM, like if you're not proclaiming quickly, you're going to get questions. And to me, and you and I have talked about this, you should be able to answer the questions. Like, I don't have to say what it is I'm for or against publicly, but if you have a question for why I am or am not saying something, then ask. And I have either A, not researched enough, and I will tell you, hey, I just don't know enough to say anything about it. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people thinking I'm indecisive or whatever, because I would rather be seen as indecisive than just flat out fucking wrong. Also, fielding those questions oftentimes helps you figure out where you lie. But because people don't want to answer questions or think critically and constructively, they think, well, I can just quickly signal that, hey, this is where I'm at, and everyone will go, yay, thanks, and I'll be fine, right? And I think that it does just come down from a laziness in the consumer. the defamation aspect, if you're going to look at whatever Goob is going to put out there and then immediately feel a certain way about who that is, that's on you. And it might be warranted, it might not be. But I just take it all with a grain of salt, everything. And I'm sure there are people probably who will listen to this that don't want to hear that. But as a man with 4 sisters, even the sexual allegations that would come out, which seemed like every other week, I would take with like I'm going to hold for a second. I just want to see how this all shakes out before I go like, fuck this person. Right. And I think that is a wise human practice, because there's a good chance that like it could happen to you. So, and maybe not on that scale, obviously not on that scale, but like a random person who maybe doesn't like you anymore, or a past friend or whatever, could say some shit and form an opinion in someone else's head immediately about you. And you wouldn't want that person to do that. You would want that person to be able to give you an opportunity at least a semi-blank slate to say, hey, no, this is a more well-rounded person. They're not just this thing, or maybe this thing isn't actually factual. And I do think that the penance on the other side is actually pretty simple, is that, hey, Goob, there are reparations to pay for you destroying a person's ability to make an income, right? Like taking that and hurting someone's reputation is akin to like killing that person or their ability to provide for themselves. So if it's now found the other way around, that you were wrong and you didn't do your due diligence in accusing this person, or you didn't do your due diligence in making sure that the information you had was sound, dude, listen, let's just say that hypothetical situation happens. Hey, Goob, now you have to go on the opposite of which, you have to promote this person. You have to make sure their reputation is now restored in your community. You have to promote their shit, or we're going to garnish your fucking wages until they recoup what they've lost month over month based on what you did. I do think that those are fair. That's a fair response. It's a fair consequence for people who decide to, again, wield that power. You as the consumer watching that, I think this is honestly why someone like Kevin Spacey, someone like, to a different degree, like Johnny Depp, which we realized that he and Heard were just both fucking crazy. But
that's actually good. That's another good example, right?
He lost everything.
Yeah, that's another great example.
Right? He lost everything, and there was no like the virility, sorry, the word I'm looking for, everything that was coming out before, we got a final like, hey, this is actually what happened, and this is what's going to happen moving forward, was harsh, and it was very much directed at him, and he lost a lot. When it came out that he was not guilty of these things, and actually some of the things that we were saying he was guilty of, she was guilty of, there wasn't that same, zeal in trying to rectify and rebuild him up. And I do think some of that comes from the fact that there is no consequence for the person who levies the false accusation. If someone had said, hey, this person, did this to me, they raped me, they did this, they stole, they killed, whatever, and then it's found out that I lied, but nothing happens to me, well, it dies. But if I go to jail for 25 years, all of a sudden that's headlines. Hey, such and such person, and now all of a sudden people are now going, okay, wait a second, hold on. And they start to reform subconsciously about the person who was accused because of the severity of what happened to the person who accused them. Because as humans, that's what we respond to. It's why I like the idea of like violent things should be okay for people who deserve it, because I'm like, we rectify things, we form things in our minds when consequences apply. If there is no consequence, it very quickly dissipates and dies into the gray, and we no longer, pay attention to it. So I'm for this.
Do you have a call?
In 10 minutes.
Okay. Do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah.
I might as well. But yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that there are a few really interesting case studies of people who have been able to get away with dishonesty with their audience even knowing that they're being dishonest. And that to me it's so contra everything else that we've talked about, that I'm curious. I think it is probably specific to that demographic of audience. And what I'm thinking about specifically is Trump, for one, and then also Andrew Tate as another. And I think that specifically, that's the demos overlap quite a bit there. So I would imagine that there has something to do with like being a disenfranchised white male who has more conservative beliefs.
It was a very like Rage Against the Machine type like feel there.
For sure. But then we also have to ask the question, it's like, well, why are there so many disenfranchised young white men who are willing to be drawn in by demagoguery,
Mhm.
right? And that's a question not enough people are asking, to be honest. Like, as a young white guy who does not subscribe to that type of shit at all, and I can see it for what it is. Hopefully, I think I can see it for what it is. Um, it's interesting to me that not enough people are asking why so many people have gravitated towards the Trumps or the Andrew Tates of the world, whenever most people just condemn them. They just condemn them as deplorables or like conspiracy theorists or QAnons or misogynists or whatever, right? Like, they just call them names. For sure, they do have those beliefs a lot of the time. But it's like, why are they so amenable to getting this like very clear disinformation and dishonesty and propaganda from certain individuals, but they will basically refuse to believe anything that is coming from people on the other side, right? So, like, good examples, like people who really like Trump think that everything that Biden and the Democrats put out is complete bullshit. They'll never believe it, right? So they put out something that says the economy is doing well. Anybody who believes Trump is automatically like they're fabricating the data. Like, that's not real data. It's not real. I don't believe it, right? But it's like, okay, well, what would you believe? Well, if Trump's team put it out, I would believe it. It's like, okay, well, that's not realistic here, right? Like, what would you actually believe? Like what could we do to close this gap between you thinking everything is fake and made up to where we need to get on the same page here, right? Like, we can't do anything better. It's obviously like frustrating and it's disheartening to see how there is such a big divide. But again, it's like what did we do to create this situation? And I do think, and this is again coming from a young white guy, I think that in the last few decades, as there's been such a push to bring everyone else up, I don't think there's been an equal effort to hold out the hand for the people who have quote unquote had like the power, right? Had the majority. I think to bring a lot of people up, there has been a steady stiff arm down or an attempted stiff arm down to young white men, especially young white conservative middle class men who have quote unquote like that power or the majority power, right? And I do think that's how so many people become fringe thinkers and have these fringe beliefs, and in a lot of ways extremely counterproductive and destructive beliefs as well. Again, I'm not one of those people. Like, I feel like I can understand how they come about, though, which maybe makes my position a little bit more unique than other people's. But yeah, it's just, I think that certain questions should be asked more and like certain things should be talked about more versus just like immediately seeing people on the other side or seeing like your quote unquote opponents and making them your enemies or like vilifying them. It's like how did they get to that point, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, it definitely, again, it comes down to like the responsible consumption and asking the right questions. And it's funny because, I mean, I knew the answer as you asked that question because it takes one to know one, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't subscribe to burning down buildings and attacking random police officers in the street. And also, I understand where the vitriol and the anger and the fear come from. I don't condone the actions, but I can understand the individuals. And I think that's usually the point whenever I'm talking about this stuff. Like, what I'm trying to make is that it's like, hey, just like you were able to provide a emotional context there because you can see yourself in a group, and you can also go, okay, I can get it, I can understand it. There's also, it adds the context to it. It doesn't make what they're doing right, or it doesn't make any of the thoughts any less wrong, but it does give context to it. And if you can take the context to things as a consumer of something, right? Because that's all comes down to consumer consumption. Whether you're buying something or forming ideas, it comes down to what you're consuming and how you're digesting and internalizing it. And we have a lot of people who only digest what they want, what sounds good to them, or what like just serves the agenda they're already trying to push in the first place, right? And so, with that being said, then the gap just gets wider and wider and wider. But there's not enough people who want to consume differing ideas and try to make a contextual, more full-bodied decision on something. Instead, they want to take whatever is easy because it's lazy and it's easy. It's like, okay, sweet, I don't have to think critically about this. these people feel the way I feel. If I hang out with them, they'll tell me what I want to hear and I can be happy about it. But it is, like you said, it's interesting how the fringes are created, because they are created through misinformation, speaking to target groups on an emotional basis, usually on like some sort of platitude that is very niche and specific to them. It's the same thing in fitness, right? These weight loss people, like they are specifically targeting people who look in the mirror and don't like what they see. So at that point in time, I can sell you anything. It doesn't matter. If I tell you I can get you what you want, I can sell you anything.
Well, it comes back to like emotional and rational vulnerability, right? So like people who are very willing to have what they want told to them, and they're willing to accept that at face value without doing any type of research or without second guessing it whatsoever, right? Like as soon as someone hears a thought or idea that confirms what they want to hear or a pre-existing belief, they latch onto it and they don't allow their rational brain to analyze it. They just basically sort that into the file with all the other shitty beliefs that they have, and then that one is supposed to confirm all of them, right? So I do think that is very problematic for sure, but it does, again, it speaks to how you can have these like cult leader personalities, these like people who are very demagogue-y, like gurus, charlatans, like all of these cults of personality. It explains it because they're talking to people's irrational side.
Mm-hmm.
They're talking to their emotions that want to believe what's being sold to them, right? Which I, again, think is why it's so important that everything funnels back to rationality and having a reasoned response and understanding of what is being put in front of your eyes and what is being funneled into your ears. Not enough people take a moment to literally step back and analyze the situation, be like, is this true?
Right.
Is this person being honest? Do I trust this person? If I were to take an opponent, an ideological opponent of this person, would they agree with what this person is saying, or would they have more evidence to the contrary, right? And I think that's very important because there are so many very, very, very smart and charismatic people who just spout bullshit all fucking day, bullshit. And a lot of times I am of the belief that they're not malicious. They just have something fucking wrong in their head. And maybe they're ideologically captured, right? Like they have subscribed so strongly to a belief that all they do is find more facts that confirms that belief. So then they are incredibly intelligent, and now they're wielding this super weapon of misinformation, right? And I mean, look at 9/11 truthers, right? You can find any facts, any videos, any audio clips to confirm or support your shitty belief and shitty hypothesis, right? It doesn't make it true, but you can sound really smart and really informed putting it out there to other people. And if they're stupid, and if they're permeable, and if they're emotionally vulnerable, they're going to just soak it up, sponge, right? But I think that this is how this stuff happens. It's shitty, but it's almost inevitable in a lot of ways, right? Because there are always going to be emotionally vulnerable people out there. And not enough people are going to be able to break the emotional reaction from the rational analysis in their brain. And, you know, maybe this is just something we talk about a little bit more. But yeah, it's always interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I think this is a good preface, a good launch pad for maybe like a little shorter series on, and maybe even continuing to dive into our buy and sell and bring a bit more context to it, and why we actually want to change our rating system from a buy or sell to more of like a gradient, you know, an A through F or 1 through 5, how much we buy or sell something, right? And then offering context in that, because it is important. But yeah, no, I mean, we'll go ahead and probably just wrap up there and note this as part 1. Thank you guys for welcoming us back. And like I said, we'll get more into these buy and sell segments, because we do find, one, a lot of benefit in being able to disseminate information quickly to you guys, and also fielding even unrelated topics and being able to address them in a more concise, probably, period than today took. But thank you again for listening, and we appreciate you guys, and we will see you next time.